I'm here with BK talking about his disaster, the Great Depression, for History 3CH3. So, BK, can you give us a little summary about your catastrophe?
Yeah, so the catastrophe it all started in the early 1920s. There was a few kind of things going on, like the president died and the vice president had to step in, who was Calvin Coolidge. He had a very kind of like relaxed leadership
And who was
style.
the president?
It was Warren Harding.
Nice, okay.
Yeah, so Calvin Coolidge kind of like this very relaxed leadership style. So a few things he did in office, he lowered the interest rate to a percentage lower than no one's ever seen it since World War I. So this kind of created a very investment-based economy. So a lot of people were investing in the banks and then trying to go into the stocks. So a lot of people were also taking loans out of the banks, and this kind of lack of cash flow in the bank system kind of created this stock market crash.
Okay, cool. So why would you say this is important to study for a catastrophe class?
I think this is very important to study because money is everywhere. You can't do anything today without money, and I'm an economics major, so throughout university I've always heard about the Great Depression, but I never really got to kind of dig deep into the nitty-gritty of it, so that's kind of why I chose.
That's cool. Usually you think catastrophe like a big explosion or death, and it's kind of cool to think of a catastrophe this way as well. So we talked about in class how you can't pinpoint a catastrophe to like one exact moment. However, there is like a gateway to the catastrophe. So, for example, in Seveso, like for lax regulations allowed for the catastrophe to happen. What would you say is the gateway for your catastrophe?
So the gateway for me was a lot of people in America decided that they would kind of buy stocks on margin. So what that kind of means is basically they would pay, let's say it's 20% of the total stock price, and the bank would own that 80-90%.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people were doing this, and this really inflated the stock prices because everyone's doing well because the stocks are going up. People are only buying a little bit of each stock. So then when it came down to the nitty-gritty, all of the major companies were just producing way too much. But then the people didn't have as much money as they used to. I think in 1929, the per family income was around $750 at the time.
Okay.
So that kind of really reduced consumption, and then there was just an overproduction of products, and then this created this kind of stock market crash.
So did anyone see this coming? Like, had this happened before? Did the media report about it? Like, I know the media warns you about things or what governments are thinking. Like, did that happen back then?
Not at the time. No one was really kind of reporting on it. No one really kind of saw it coming because, the economy was doing well. The stock market is rising. Like, people are making money. But there was just such an inflation of these stock prices that they just collapsed so fast with consumption.
So it was the first time, really, they'd seen it. So they just thought this is great. Report that. Okay, cool. So if you could pick one word to describe this disaster, what would you pick? Because it is quite complicated.
It is, yes. It's a very complicated disaster, but I'd probably pick credit. Only because everyone was just buying on credit, and no one was really kind of using their own money to purchase things.
Okay, cool. Like the main factor.
Yeah.
Neat. So we talked a little bit about the president and what they did, but what was the reaction once they realized that this was a disaster, a catastrophe?
Yeah, so Herbert Hoover was actually the president in 1929 when the stock market crashed. It crashed on October 29th, which is now known as Black Tuesday.
Ooh.
So Herbert Hoover decided to kind of lower the discount rate. So how it kind of works is like you have your discount rate, you have your interest rate, and they kind of work reverse of each other. So if the discount rate rises, your interest rate falls.
Okay.
So in order to kind of stabilize the economy and allow for a very consistent recovery, he lowered the discount rate to kind of keep the interest rate high.
Okay.
So that the banks and the government were making enough money that they could run a bit of a deficit in order to kind of shock the economy.
So was this lowering of the discount rate effective, do you think?
It actually wasn't effective at all.
Oh, okay.
The interest rate still kind of tanked and kind of started off like the early 1930s, 1931 and 1932 were actually the two of the worst years for the Great Depression. So it kind of led them into this very steep downhill in the economy.
So eventually, how did we get out of it if the government's actions didn't work?
So in 1933, Herbert Hoover lost to Franklin Roosevelt.
New president.
So new president in 1933. I'm pretty sure he was inaugurated on March 4th. And he kind of went through his whole campaign was kind of based around like, when I get into office, I'm going to go like through a 100-day kind of legislation spree. Like, I'm going to do whatever I can to kind of get us out of this recession.
Okay.
But the one major factor that he didn't kind of consider was running this kind of deficit in order to shock the economy. He wanted to stay away from deficits, wanted to stay away from the USA going into more debt.
Okay, so his campaign was run on the Great Depression, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, the repercussions of the Great Depression, how long did they last? Like, what were they?
Well, so the Great Depression was kind of an international catastrophe, and so it was around 1939, kind of the rest of the world was kind of back on track to what their normal economies would look like. The United States kind of hung around until like kind of almost like the early 1940s when they kind of truly got out of recession.
Okay, cool. So it was an international Great Depression.
Yes.
So what other countries were involved?
So a lot of Europe was involved in the Great Depression, just because the United States and Europe were just such major trading partners at the time.
Yeah, that's true.
So since everyone was kind of overproducing in the United States, and the economy wasn't doing too well, and businesses were closing down, there really wasn't much trade going on. So kind of everyone's economies took a hit.
Yeah, true. So we went through a little depression in 2008.
Yes.
So how do you think the two compare? Like, what similarities or differences do they have?
So the 2008 kind of stock market crash was just a completely different factor. So the Great Depression was kind of more revolved around banks.
Okay.
And 2008 was more revolved around kind of mortgages and housing prices.
Okay.
So what a lot of people were doing in 2008 was kind of laundering their money. So they were just kind of purchasing houses, but no one was kind of really living there, which created a lot of people not being able to purchase homes because people were just buying homes left, right, and center to kind of save some money and kind of have an investment.
So it increased.
So more like housing prices went up so much, everyone's kind of investing in the housing market, and then kind of like the Great Depression, it was just all the prices were just so inflated that they just crashed.
Mm-hmm. And 2008 wasn't as international; it was more North American.
It was more North American.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So, last question for you. During the last class, we came up with some rules of catastrophes, and I know at our table it was mitigation, preparedness, and so on. So what rules would you list about catastrophes or guidelines and catastrophes in regards to the Great Depression after studying it?
Yeah. So kind of one of my first rules, and this might seem odd, but it almost comes down to like the individual person, like not investing too much and kind of being able to save, because you need to save in order for our economy to kind of progress. So saving is a big part of it, and educating yourself about different things to invest in is a very good way to kind of get yourself ahead of the curve, so to speak.
Cool. So that's individually a rule for a catastrophe.
Yeah.
But regarding for a government, what would you suggest?
So the Great Depression kind of revolved around a lot of economic influctuation. So things just weren't in balance. So for governments, the kind of rule of thumb would be to kind of make sure that everything is kind of in line. And also, depressions like the Great Depression kind of happen through long periods of recession. So kind of when you kind of go through a longer recession, trying to go into like what Franklin Roosevelt did and run a kind of like a budget deficit where you kind of try to spark the economy.
Okay.
I think that's kind of a rule of thumb for them.
So would you say it inevitably is avoidable, or to an extent you're always going to have a depression, it's just natural, but it's just trying to contain how big it is?
I think depressions are pretty much inevitable. Recessions are always around us, and they do happen for a long period of time, and people like to invest. Sometimes we invest too much on credit. I know from my credit card, I do invest a lot on credit.
Same.
And I personally do think that depressions are inevitable, just because we use a lot of money that we don't necessarily have, which creates a large kind of inflation of those
a capitalist
prices.
society.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
True. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for chatting with me, and thanks everyone for listening.